Thank you, Vikram. So now we do have the panel, and thanks for being at DAO Day. So I would like to invite to the stage Priit, um, Frank, and two people are joining us online, right?
Hi, everybody.
And Raimo is also here. Yeah, that's the moderator chair. So yeah, we're going to start this panel, and maybe Astra, would you like to say something in here, real quick?
Thank you. Thank you. Hear me, yeah. So sorry for such a small changes in the agenda. It happens when one person is late or second person is late, but we still want to have them all with us, you know. So right now we will move forward with the agenda in such way that we're gonna have this panel. After that, we're gonna have a keynote, a live keynote, and after that, we're gonna have online. Ott Welsberg, the Estonian data chief officer, with us. So it seems that the lunch will be a little bit smaller, but feel free to take the food here or just enjoy, right? So welcome to the panelists, welcome the moderator. I know that this is going to be a very cool panel discussion. And because we had a trial call, yeah, I have to confess.
And we have one person joining online, Al William. I think he's already online.
Yeah, Al William from Solid World is with us online. Javier Ortin on the right side, Reimo Hammerberg in the middle, Franck Nouyrigat, and Priit Lätt. So please enjoy the stage.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here. As I understand, this is the first DAO conference in the whole world. So congratulations for the organizers. And thanks for joining the online and offline. So it's amazing to have this shining weather here in Tallinn right now. This is really rare situation in Estonia. Let's see how shiny it will be in Estonia regarding DAOs. But before going into the details, let's make a very quick introduction. 60 seconds each, please.
1, 2. Hi, everybody. My name is Frank. Very briefly, I started my life as a boring consultant, working for PricewaterhouseCoopers and then Oracle for a couple of years. And then I dropped everything, went for a world trip, ended up moving to the US from France, launching a nonprofit called Startup Weekend, scaled it to 150 countries with 500,000 founders going through it. Then after that, moved from Seattle to New York, launched a consulting firm that mixes entrepreneurs with large corporation trying to change the way corporation works, and of course it didn't work. Then moved to Puerto Rico, launched a distributed computing company called Massive, which raised money 5 years ago with the idea of being the Airbnb for your computer and finding a way to monetize internet without your private life. Then moved back to France and Estonia as very recently to launch Electis, which is an electronic voting company. And we'll be talking about that on DAOs and e-voting.
Great, thanks. Reimo.
Hi, my name is Reimo. I'm 2 times tech company founder, and between the two, spent close to 20 years as a capital markets and financial services attorney here in the Baltic States. The first one was hardware company, second software company, and currently spending my days with a fintech called Wallester, where I serve as a supervisory board chairman. Thanks.
Hello, I will be very brief because I already introduced myself at the beginning, but for those who are late, I'm Javier Ortin, one of the co-founders of INO, Internet Native Organization, with the hope of bringing DAO principles to the mainstream and, well, solving legal issues in the way. And, well, I'm an engineer and a Web3 developer. I'm passionate about technology and, well, hope I can give an insight from my experience in the Estonian culture also.
Thank you. And online, Res, are you here?
Yes, I am. I hope my detached, unbodied voice carries over well into that hole over there. But yes, hi, I'm Rez. Well, the internet knows me as Rez. My real name is Al. I'm the co-founder of SolidWorld, previously SolidWorld DAO for this conversation, which is building scalable climate financing infrastructure. And I'm personally really obsessed with the subfields of crypto and environmental finance called regenerative finance, or ReFi. I also co-host a podcast called This Week in ReFi, and occasionally write a blog about carbon and token economics, because those are really complicated subjects, and I just love chaos and complications.
Thanks, Res. You are coming from Tartu to Tallinn. So I was told this is a perfect mix of experts. So we have legal side, we have business side, we have technological side. But I was told, before going to the questions, I was told that this is the only place here in Estonia, maybe in the whole world, where socks and sandals together are okay. So this is kind of freedom. So this is also a statement for the panel. I guess you can free with your statements. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the topic. Topic is Estonia's readiness for DAOs. You know, I'm still a lawyer, and every lawyer must have definitions. We need to define in order to understand what to regulate, who to regulate, and how to regulate. So as a starter, and taking into consideration that there is no legal definition of DAOs in Estonian or at the EU level, maybe as a starter, could you please tell what is your definition of decentralized autonomous organizations? Yeah. How do you define these kind of organizations?
Well, I've got a short version and a longer version.
Okay, shoot.
But to me, it's almost like a philosophical debate when we say decentralized and autonomous organization. The key word is autonomous. Autonomous from what? You know, what have changed and all these things. So the simple definition I have is it's an organization created by people who are very familiar with anything digital. It's developers, you know, coming together and being like, we're going to code our constitution. We're going to code the way we work. We're going to print our own currency. So it's basically you building your own country as a developer. Then you bring people in and you say, this is our constitution. This is how we're going to work. And you do all of that, you know, leveraging voting through a token or through an NFT. And then there's a lot of experiments within that, and we're still learning. But I want you to reflect on why is that. And really briefly, if you look at the way we're organized, we have companies, we have CEOs. We took a couple of hundreds of years from after the Industrial Revolution to do that. And the reason this thing exists is not because the government wanted this thing to be created. It was because we had to go from tiny organization to very big organization. And then we had to figure out a way to organize it, like to build, for example, the Panama Canal, which is when this structure appeared from. And then the government came in and be like, how do I tax it? And we need to kind of figure out a way to interact with this organization. And I kind of feel right now we're like in the 19th century, you have these digital things coming after the industrial things coming before. And right now the discussion we're having is very similar to that. So I try to kind of think about it that way.
Thanks, Reimo. Maybe from legal side or
Well, the legal side is very simple, as you know, Priit. It's from legal side there is no definition, hence there is no definition. It doesn't.
So
it doesn't exist.
Organizations illegal or?
But the intriguing question here comes also is the why. Why people come for that? And for me is first of all, it seems to be there is a good chunk of kind of a rebellion attitude towards the existing governance structures, and let's say it, for the bad management or bad governance. So people then organize in a more flat structure, and they feel that it's now it's a kind of it's a better, like let's play the ancient Greek, so to speak. And the second part, you know, interesting with those DAOs is, you know, why people couldn't just gather together, you know, have the things, you know, organize themselves together, why there needs to be a DAO. And there is probably the same, you know, you kind of ascribe this notion to the lawyers, but I think it's in general for the human beings, we have the pursuit, or we have the tendency or need to simplify and to understand. We have a need, fundamental need for clarity, and hence we need a definition. So we say this new flat organization, let's call it DAO, because there is this tech element and all those, rebellion elements there, and let's call it a DAO. But now comes the really interesting questions, which we will dwell more into in our panel here is, but we still want to have the benefits of the corporations and LLCs, right? So it's a very long, convoluted answer, but it's really, why do we have it in the first place? But no definition, that's easy.
Super, thanks.
So from the technical part, it's quite easy to define. But then when we go into it, it's not so easy. But the general understanding is that it's a management structure using blockchain for, well, the technology side. Well, not only blockchain, but some more aspects. But at the end, it's just a management structure for, well, a project, a purpose, whatever. But in reality, what we see is that the only thing that is common to all DAOs is being internet native. That's why we called INO Internet Native Organization, because it seemed more appropriate to something that reflects a bit better what is the idea behind of these kind of organizations. That's the only thing. Because if we start to dig into what are the different DAOs, they are either not decentralized, either not autonomous. So there are many different aspects to it. And there are many different DAOs. So I hope this just doesn't leave the impression that, well, there is no definition for DAOs. In a sense, there is no, we could say that one of the few things that is common to all of them, because there are many different types, is that they are internet native. And blockchain is one of the technologies that allows for this trustless or seamless interoperability, in the sense that you don't need to trust a third-party provider to execute or the governance or to execute different organization processes. So that's basically why we use blockchain, because it's the, let's say, the untrusted, or, well, the entity that doesn't need to trust because it's not an entity, it's decentralized. Blockchain itself, it is always decentralized. So, yeah.
Before moving to rest, Frank, you had some kind of
I
argument.
want to be sure we give a definition, and I was reflecting on what you both were saying, and what is the common point between all the DAOs, and it's quite simple. It's an organization where the bylaws are made as a smart contract. And so again, like the legal side starts on the electronic side. Code is law is kind of a way of thinking about it.
Perfect application using smart contracts. Indeed. Res, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I would start with the core of it, that a DAO is essentially a combination of code and people. So you might have some aspects of the organization which are either partially or completely governed by code. Why I emphasize the existence of people is because often you see people fill in the gaps that the code doesn't, and the code might fill in like actually very few gaps in the whole system, which is why you end up seeing things that were either, not decentralized or not autonomous or barely an organization, right? The second aspect of this, which I think is important, is that DAOs are functionally cross-border by nature. The kind of reasons why they end up cropping up have a lot to do with kind of who can get involved and how easy is it and how complicated is it to set up things. Because in crypto, kind of anyone can have a bank account, anything can have a bank account functionally due to the way self-custodied wallets work. So in some sense, it can almost be like a group of friends with a crypto bank account. Finally, addressing the code element, this is where I think on a regulatory level, things get really interesting, because the code may or may not even be mutable, which means that even if you wanted to write the law functionally, like governing code is very complicated. And coming back to the people side, there might be an inner circle that can look even exactly like a traditional company with a CEO style person, developers, managers, etc. And they might deploy code which then might be decentralized and autonomous. But there's like different ways of looking at this. And finally, as to the why, I think that it's because there's often a lot of friction in getting involved in any sort of actual effort to build anything or change anything. And often retail feels, I think, excluded also from the opportunities that there is to get involved in these kind of initiatives in meaningful ways, because well, due to how laws are constructed, retail is really gated off from participating in things early, especially if there's any sort of financial stake in the game. And I think that's where I would currently draw the line.
Okay, thanks for the first round. Going more into market and ecosystem participants' readiness to adopt these kind of governance models, and talking about Estonian situation, all of you have experience with Estonia. So my thesis is that we need culture first. We need culture first, and then we can, build perfect regulations. Then we can set up perfect legal structures. But we need culture first. Is Estonian culture ready to adopt and build these kind of governance models, organizations? What's your feeling?
Maybe I can start then. Well, again, let's go back one step and see, what are those governance models then? What are those, relationships between the people in those governance models? In my opinion, there is nothing new, right? Still, there are stakeholders, right? The kind of a more generic group of people. There are perhaps, somebody more with the managerial tasks, somebody, accountable for gathering more information, delivering this information to the broader circle of stakeholders, that they would be able to make decisions, because the quality decisions require information of being informed. So from that perspective, as far as the governance is concerned, I think those are universal principles of participation. I think Estonia is ready, and for that matter, I would say any country, perhaps, save for the dictatorships, are ready. I mean, in this sense, it's kind of still the same governance model that we see all around, just a good, sound, with a high integrity, a governance model. Of course, we're ready.
So I would take it from here. I agree on the governance side, it might be ready. And then if we talk about the idea of internet native organizations, the main point is that they are internet native. So they start from the internet. They require that people are familiar with digital tools, and they are used to operate in a, well, let's say, digital manner, in the sense that most of the DAOs run decentralized, and people may not even meet each other on the distance. So I would say that in the cultural aspect, one of the requirements for readiness is precisely readiness for digital tools, or readiness for operating in a digital manner. So for most of us, it might be useful because we might have every day 2-3 meetings online, for instance, and maybe most of our days is behind our screen, but not for everybody is that way. In that sense, I would say in Estonia, it's a bit more typical than in other places, in the sense that, as we all have heard many times, Estonia is a e-country and a digital country. It might be a bit of too much marketing, but in a sense, it's also true that the Estonian population is very ready to adopt digital tools. Of course, we cannot say that 100% of people are ready for it, but that will never be the case, I think. But in general, there is a vast majority of people that are willing, not only ready, but willing to try new digital things, new digital tools. And that's one of the things that we need for DAOs, especially when DAOs are still not mainstream. And of course, the tools for making it mainstream are not ready. And but that's a different discussion topic.
To me, I think about two things. Well, first of all, I love Estonia. If not, I wouldn't be here. And if the question is related, are the Estonian people awesome at building DAO and digital things? No doubt. I always think of Estonia as the startup nation of Europe, like the Israel of Europe. It is at least statistically right behind it. Great trust of the people of Estonia. I think the answer is yes, yes, yes. Estonia is awesome at that. Now, a good example was when Estonia started to launch its e-Estonian coin. Was the first country to do that, launched it. And then where I'm a little bit more skeptical is about Europe and the ability of Europe to let Estonia flourish and do all these things, because what happened is Europe came and said, no, Estonia, you don't build a e-coin and all of that. And I have no doubt that, and again, it's part of your history, right? You've been through Soviet Union, you get out of it, your president was a big fan of Milton Friedman, and what he says is like, we need freedom, freedom, freedom. Let's innovate, let's build great things. And that is part of the zeitgeist, that's part of the culture of Estonians. And for that, I think it's gonna be awesome. Now, the opportunity is, can Estonia capture some of that? Will Estonia be able to figure out a regulation that pleases both sides? I don't know. But it doesn't matter, because the Estonian will build great organization, great DAO and great business. The question is, will they incorporate it here or in Switzerland or God knows where?
Okay. It seems we need, as Estonians, push more in order to get faster, attention even at the European level.
And make a deal with Europe and say, hey, we're research and development for Europe. Like, give us some freedom.
We're the R&D country. Please just leave us.
Yeah. Res, we are talking about different stakeholders and their readiness to adopt these kind of new governance models. Maybe you can share your story with Solid World DAO. What's your experience with traditional investors regarding the progressive decentralization you adopted last year, but somehow it, how to put it? It didn't succeed, or it was too early.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we had to take a couple of steps back. Yeah, I'll answer the original question and then go a bit into detail here. I think functionally, when we're talking about Estonia in isolation, I think we have absolutely no problems. I mean, Estonia is technically capable of delivering and interfacing with these kind of systems. I think it's culturally a lot more familiar than in other places where people still mainly operate on paper in order to even interface with their government. I mean, in Estonia, we have had public-private key cryptography in the form of like the Estonian ID card for decades now. It's just a normal facet of our life. Like the wallet or, how people interact in crypto is very, I think, familiar to that. And in general, I think retail is very okay with these kind of structures. It's more of a question of corporates. And the interactions that Solid World has had historically is that we show up, we talk about what we're doing, we try to explain, here's how you can get involved, and then it goes to wait, I don't understand. You're registered as a non-profit. What does that mean? And then we go like, well, we're a DAO, and then it's like, what is that? And then we're like, we have a governance token. You can, go and vote on Snapshot. And then you get into like this, you keep going and going and going and going, until you finally realize that you have spent all of the time you could have been possibly explaining, what exactly are you building and why does it create value? You have instead spent the whole time explaining how governance structures work in this kind of very unfamiliar landscape for like a traditional corporate. And even if they personally understand it, the expectation that now they need to explain this to somebody else really ruins the whole picture, because it feels very alien to the traditional ways these corporates operate, and that's a huge part of friction, and why I feel currently DAOs are in this stage where they're more of this like retail experiment, and when you start interfacing with corporates, we really get into the onto like the frontier of very high friction things that we have yet to figure out.
So even if founders are ready to adopt these new models, still we need to educate not only the policymakers or regulators, but also investors or traditional investors, as I understand.
I mean, there's huge operational questions, even just the functional question of, for example, let's say you have a governance token and you want to give this governance token to, for example, this corporate. You end up with questions about tax, you end up with questions about custody, you end up with questions about like their internal processes to meet any of these requirements, like can they even hold these kind of assets, how do they show up on the balance sheet? When the auditor shows up, what kind of questions are they asking? Does this make them go, oh no, I don't understand what's happening? There's like a bunch of these like operational questions that you run into, and at some point you really need to take 2 steps back and be like, hey, are we really on this part? Or is this really the battle we want to fight, or do we want to fight the battle of how do we figure out good climate finance?
Yeah, thanks. Talking about the educational part, and tools to help educate, then what's your opinion? Are there enough resources available to help founders, investors, lawmakers, policymakers to navigate the process of finding either the right regulation or the proper legal structure for a particular business? What's your feeling on that? Is it there? I'm not talking only about Estonian level, but what's your feeling? Are there enough resources, infrastructure?
I can talk about our own experience. So we're looking to build a DAO for a new organization. And the way it works is I'm going to call my friends who've done DAOs. And then each of them has like a horror story about how it went wrong, how they got sued, how it was complex, how they had to spend a lot of money to structure it. And you try to find patterns. So it's going to be this weird structure where it's going to be a foundation in Switzerland, some stuff in Gibraltar, then a C Corp in the US. Like the conclusion is the whole part when it was the ICO and you try to raise millions of dollars and doing a DAO, I think this thing now it's kind of past. I think there was a window where people were like, we have no idea what's happening, especially in the US with the SEC going back and hammering all these organizations. When we talked to lawyers in Wyoming has like this special thing where they did a DAO structure attached to an LLC. I'm sorry, all of that are like US structures. But the conclusion is, from a legal perspective, the lawyers we talk to, they say like, at the end of the day, DAO is just the way you guys organize yourself. And as long as you separate the organization, I mean, maybe you can put it in a C Corp or an S Corp, like that's no issue. To me, that seems like the easy path. It's not as ambitious as doing like the full DAO thing. I think if you want to do the full DAO thing, then it has to be legal. And then you just have to go full, all right, like let's build anonymity and all of that, but it's not something I would recommend, of course.
Full DAO, you mean fully decentralized,
fully
proper way?
But I think then you need to add the anonymous locked into it so no one can regulate you. And there's going to be that fight. I think the next fight will be people say it's illegal to encrypt things, but it's going to be a fun fight.
I would like to join in here and really emphasize the fact that anonymity for a bunch of these DAOs is the only reason why they can functionally exist.
Like Bitcoin at the early days, right?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is a good example of this, but there are a bunch of, for example, protocols built on Ethereum that have like full anon teams. And the reason why they have full anon teams is just the fact that then it's not clear who is supposed to regulate them because they just put out code. I mean, it's code. Are you going to go and regulate code? No, you're going to regulate people. Who are the people? You have no idea. So functionally can't regulate it. And it's a sort of, I've talked with a couple of founders who have then received legal advice later of like, oh, damn, it's pretty bad that you're not anonymous. You should have considered never disclosing that anybody is related to this organization.
Yeah, I would say that it might make sense for some protocols to go fully DAO in that sense of anonymity, decentralization, and all that. Because when we talk about technology, one thing that is often emphasized is the neutrality of the technology. And having protocols in the blockchain are protocols that those don't run under an entity, a legal entity or framework. They run on the technology. And those protocols also need a bit of governance, at least for some parameters. And I think that for those, it's totally okay to be totally decentralized, fully DAO in that sense, and actually try to avoid any regulation, because that's part of the technology. That would be the same as trying to regulate STMP and, well, email protocols that are not regulated anywhere. They are just technology that is neutral, that is used by everyone. So for some technological tools, it can be okay to be fully decentralized. At least that's my opinion. We still need to study more about it. But for some other DAOs, it doesn't make sense. It's okay to be decentralized and a lot of different stakeholders, but need to be careful on how they operate because they might take some liabilities. And yeah, I don't remember what was the question, but this was connecting
Question
with
is
the
no
other.
one knows how to, there's no toolkit.
Are there enough tools? Are there enough tools for the participants, you know, to set up legal wrappers for DAOs or even to go pure DAOs?
Sorry, real quick, because we had before this gentleman from the World Forum, Economic Forum, who presented like the DAO toolkit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Again, when I look at it, I'm like, that's a great tool, but it's like, here's our tool, so you fit into our tool. And you know, that's one way to think of it. But when you're an entrepreneur, you're like, okay, first principle, I've got AI, I've got DAO, I can print more money, I can reorganize society as I want. Like my first question will not be, how do I fit into that box? It's like, I'm going to build my thing, and then if there's no box where I fit, what do I do?
Right. Before choosing the tools, the question was about tools, right? Is the question that we should ask is what's the job to be done, right? Why do we want this decentralization? So if we get this decentralization, what will that achieve us to, you know, get really, right? What will that help us to achieve? And then what, right? And currently, you know, I heard the rest saying that the goal was to escape regulation. Okay, say you escape the regulation, then what? What will that enable you to achieve, right? And then what? So there is a lot of peeling of the onion to be done, in my opinion, to understand really what is the end goal, what is the benefit that we are after, what is the job to be done, and then, surprise, surprise, picking of the tools becomes easy, always.
I want to be sure our friend in Tartu answers, but real quick, I want to answer what you said. I'll give you an example. So the way we build a company right now is we have stocks, right? You have shares, and share is like 1/10, 1/1,000,000th of a company. What if I don't want a company to be organized that way? What if I want to say, if you contribute, you get the NFT to your contribution. So let's say I attach an NFT to an email you sent. And let's say this email and this work you've done is worth $1 million. I want to reward you $1 million. How do I do that with shares? How do I do that with another legal? I'm incapable of that. And so it's not about escaping regulation for escaping taxes. That's, I mean, some people might do that, but for entrepreneurs and for the people who are doing these things, like, I can do all these things. Why am I not allowed to reorganize something differently?
But hence comes the question again. So kind of, I promise I take 30 seconds for that. So you say, you know, what if I want to reward people by giving them NFTs, right? What would that allow you to achieve? This is just an action.
No, you didn't hear. Like the shareholder, the way it works is you have a share of a company. Right. I'm saying get rid of shares, no more shares.
Why?
Because it's not fair.
Why is it not fair?
Sorry?
Why is it not fair?
But again, let's say you let's say you do a work in a company, yes, right? And this work is worth $1 million.
Yes.
Okay. And let's say you, I give you the same amount of share because that was the deal when you came to the company. You generated $1 million of value, but you're going to get, I don't know, $10. Like, it's not an optimum. If I can build something like that and it works, then I will attract talent. Then I will build a better company. Then I will crush the competition. So again, it's like
So you're discussing actually about rewarding the work.
For example, that's one example out of thousands of examples.
Right. But then there are instruments for that purpose, and then we should discuss about rewarding the work and structures. But I promise to take 30 seconds, so we have to
they don't exist. We can talk about it after, but like, yeah.
Actually, this is a belief behind DAOs in creating more, how to put it, inclusive space, you know. You can, issue share options in order to reward the work of employees, but seems to be not enough. But okay, this is a different talk. We are moving into policy making stage. What should be the goals of policy and regulation of DAOs? Consumer protection, fighting against money laundering, terrorist financing, or if a lawmaker wants to regulate it or create a strategy, what should be the goals?
The lawmaker should start from the same place. Ask really what is the problem we are solving here? What is the bottleneck? What is the kind of the benefit for the society, right? And all those things are good things, right? Even though I'm kind of, putting up the argument here, of course, the more you give proper incentives, the more flexible you are with the kind of toolkit for the incentives, the more good things presumably will happen, right? The more wealth and the more, value will be generated in the world. That's all clear. But for the lawmaker, my only kind of recommendation would be kind of be patient and be, observative and be in a discovery mode. See
Wait
what
and
is missing.
see.
Yeah, and not just kind of observe and pay attention and see and, be in a dialogue.
So I think it's pretty obvious that the goal is one of the main points of view when regulating, I think. But also like being understanding on what is behind, in the sense that how the DAO operates. If it operates just as a normal company, just that the, let's say, technology is different, well, it might be regulated as a company. But the thing is that we have to be careful with trying to put a frame that tries to fit all the different possibilities, because that's not going to be possible. That's going to be very hard to do. And I lost my other point. So I guess, Frank, you can continue. Or Reese.
Let's not forget our Tartuffe man.
Yes, Res.
Yes. I think the best place to start with this question is actually answering the last one a bit more, since I just wanted to have like a couple of examples of why are people trying to skirt the law. I think that's a really important question here, and ends up being the answer to like what kind of policy should exist. So let's talk a bit about decentralized finance for a moment. So what decentralized finance is trying to do, it's trying to create code which essentially replaces functions of a financial institution in a way that the financial institution is replaced by pure code. If you understand what the code does, then all of the parties only need to trust the code and not each other. So this is like very subversive in its nature. I think regulators are a bit worried about this, and I think there are a bunch of examples from the landscape of decentralized finance of where regulation becomes like really weird. So the best example publicly so far is just the fact that we had this protocol get sanctioned by the OFAC last year. This protocol is called Tornado Cash. And what it does, it helps people on public ledgers obfuscate the source of funds. So you send some money in there, you take some money out. There's no link between these two things. So if you take it out on another account, you like nobody like externally observing can immediately know where this money came from. This is very subversive. A lot of retail people, for just their own reasons, like would like some privacy, but this was also used by, for example, terrorists. This was used by North Korea to launder hacked funds. This is a huge problem, obviously. Now, this is why Tornado Cash got sanctioned, but Tornado Cash is code, functionally, right? It's just code. It's code that exists. It doesn't have like an administrative team doing stuff in the background. It's just code. And they arrested in the Netherlands a developer of this code who had never facilitated a transaction on their own. There's so far not a lot of proof that they were actually like intending to make this for North Koreans so they could launder funds, but he got arrested for writing open source code. Now, this is kind of the area of where being anonymous is pretty nice, because at least then if some random government somewhere decides that you broke the laws because you released open source code, you're at least protected from this kind of a situation happening to you. Another example might be, let's say, futures exchanges. Futures exchanges are very manipulatable structures that if you don't have oversight into them, you could really damage the people that are participating in your futures exchange, because there's no real kind of good way to handle a bunch of these questions if you're a centralized technology provider, right? Like, how is order flow routed? Are these transactions real? How do you prevent front running? And more questions like this. And if you're a centralized organization, you need the government to step in, because if you operate an unregulated futures exchange, you are going to damage a bunch of people. But let's say all of this futures exchange is pure code. Do you need a regulator to come in? They can't really do anything. But because you have released this thing that is immutable potentially and pure code, you are now legally liable as like this code writer of putting this thing out. Now, even if the government stepped in and said like, hey, we want changes X, Y, and Z, you couldn't even do that. You essentially released immutable code. So in some sense, this is almost like an act of terror against the traditional finance system, which is like very subversive. And that causes a lot of issues, I think, exactly on this intersection. And so people stay anonymous because if they're operating like this internationally on almost like this international stage, there just isn't clarity. And even if you have clarity from one regulator, a lot of these things don't really function on this global scale. So regulation gets very weird. Now, what kind of regulation should exist? I think ultimately that's a very hard question to answer. And like a better question to answer here would be, what kind of support structure should the government provide in terms of a sounding board or a person to discuss with, or a person you could educate on these topics that works at the government, that can interface with you and explain how to navigate this in like a friendly way? Because I think we often frame the interactions with the government as almost like adversarial. I've had multiple discussions with people who live outside of Estonia about, like, for example, how they interact with their own tax office. Now, in Estonia, when I told my international friends that I had called my tax office this year multiple times to try and make sure that I was doing some crypto-related accounting things correctly, they looked at me like I was insane, because nobody has this kind of a relationship with their government. Like, the government doesn't come in and say like, oh, let me sit down and do 2 hours of research for you so you would have a good answer. That functionally usually doesn't happen. But I think these are the kind of structures that should exist to support this kind of innovation, because often we're talking about such fringe situations of reality that if you set up like one regulation to handle this, it's probably not going to do the job.
Yeah, I would come in here that taking that and what we previously said, one of the key aspects of DAOs is, as well as Web3 technology in general, is flexibility. The possibility to speed up things, to just try out very quickly, gather a bunch of people together, and you don't need, for instance, with the Constitution DAO example, that is the very typical one, that in less than a week, I think it was like $15 million, or I don't remember the amount, but a lot of money was raised
40.
very quickly. 40, okay, 40. And of course it took less time in raise that money that it would have taken only to open a bank account, even if you already had an existing entity. So that's one of the aspects of it. And that's one of the main aspects of Web3 technology, the flexibility, the amount of new possibilities that are open with this technology. So this is one of the very key aspects to take an account for policymakers and for regulation. Be careful on what to regulate, because we might be breaking all these new possibilities just by trying to regulate too much. At the same time, there are some things that need to be regulated, and the things that are clear that need to be regulated for protecting consumers or for protecting investors, well, they need to be implemented. But I would say that they have to be like for specific things that are already more or less clear. And of course, you could say, but oh, what about all these people that are experimenting with us? Well, they are there experimenting on their own, at their own risk. They know what they are getting involved into. So it's not that the normal person in the street that has no money is going to try to get involved in a new thing that's going to make him lose all his money. But it's about people that just want to figure out and make the path for the next people coming into this technology. So it just try not to break innovation and new ideas. I would say that's one of the key aspects for policy making, and of course following what's happening. If something bad happens and it's very clear that it can be regulated, of course we're going to step in and regulate that.
A quick note here is kind of as far as regulation is concerned, right? We have to keep in mind the ultimate beneficiaries or ultimate stakeholders and their interests. And our society is well regulated in this sense. We have a consumer protection, we have investor protection, we have AML rules in place. You know, all those rules are actually necessary, but they're there. And as we have seen, you know, so many people thought ICOs are beyond the law. Proved wrong, badly wrong, right? And would most of them bother to have taken a decent legal advice, they would have known it in advance. But they didn't, because, you know, it's unnecessary cost, right? So in this sense, I fully agree that it's kind of there is no need to go more in and start regulating at the moment, because, you know, we are in a good place as far as the stakeholder protection is concerned.
So real quick, to me, the counterexample to the ICO is Bitcoin. I mean, if you go look back at what happened before Bitcoin, there were a bunch of people building similar protocols. What happened is they ended up in jail. And so that's why Bitcoin was created by Satoshi Nakamoto or whoever that is. And when you look at it, like everybody was against it. Every country was making it illegal. But at the end, as you were saying, like how do you shut down a protocol? And this thing has been running for what, 15 years now or something like that, or 10 years, and it has value. It has everyone should be trying to hack it, and it's still alive. And now, in a weird way, this thing is really weird as a technology. The countries had to adapt, because then countries are like, oh shit, there's like billions of dollars. And so, as a regulator, I think I would follow what Switzerland does, which is we want to regulate these things, but we want to welcome it. We're not going to fight it. If I have to be rational about the way it's going to happen in Europe, I think two things will happen. There's going to be an e-euro, and there's going to be a digital identity. And then you can keep the mechanism of a DAO, because I'll be able to track as a legal entity where the money goes and what it does. And I think the faster Europe can build these two tools, the better it is. But of course, Estonia already have almost launched its e-Estonian coin and already have digital identity. But to me, that's going to be the two ingredients, because the reason you have incorporations, the reason you have a legal system like that is for taxation. So as soon as you sign a bunch of paper, then a government, which is elected by the people in a democracy and all of that, is like, okay, we want to be sure you give back the fair part to the society. But again, this thing comes from the 19th century. Like the people who designed this thing didn't think about, I can be here, my co-founder is going to be in the Saudi, another one is in New York, we build value here, we capture value there. It's going to be like, the only way I can see it being solved regulatorily is with e-euro. And again, there's always going to be these two sides where people say, I don't like this regulation, we're going to build our whole anonymous world.
All right. It seems to be consensus here that we don't need bespoke DAO law here in Estonia, as I understand. On the opposite, let's see and wait how those businesses wrapped in the DAO emerge. But we need to we need to educate more policymakers, regulators.
We could potentially, right? But I would say, those numbers are nice that we saw in the previous presentation as well, that it's kind of the DAO number is growing and the participants in DAO is growing. But if you put it in a greater scale, it's absolutely, on an atomic, nano level currently. So we can easily, as a society, afford to absorb that risk. But the only thing what we are obligated to do is observe carefully. But it's kind of, let's see. But informing, engaging, governments and regulators, that's always a good idea, because it builds trust.
Observing carefully, I like this, because if you look how Estonian regulators behave, then I would dare to say that they are observing carefully. On the opposite is what's happening in the US. In November, Commodity Futures Trading Commission launched litigation against OkiDAO. Okay, very interesting case for lawyers, very non-interesting case for businesses. But this is their way of educating people and businesses. But in Estonia we have different culture from the regulator point of view, and I like this culture. Do you agree?
I respectfully disagree in a sense, but because as you know, as a lawyer in US, you can go and obtain for the no action reliefs. If you bother to invest, right, you can go and you actually get a more sound or stronger statement from the regulator than you get in Europe, which actually holds up in court later on. Right.
Absolutely.
But if you don't do that, that's your own peril.
If you don't bear this, as you said, unnecessary cost, Okay.
I personally have heard a bunch of very interesting horror stories when it comes to interacting with the SEC in the US. Often it comes down to the fact that, the US securities law is already very exciting as it is, because you could functionally breathe on something and it would become a security if there's enough people behind it. But
that sounded like a legal analysis.
yeah, very legal analysis. But the other half of this is the US is in a situation of regulation by enforcement, where a bunch of these guidelines kind of get invented through like legal action. And as an entrepreneur in that kind of a space, this is very terrifying. I mean, that is kind of the last situation you want to find yourself in. And often I feel by the time you are asking the government for these kinds of opinions, by that time you will probably have already done something very not okay by the government's estimation. This seems to be, at least among the business community, the standard understanding of what it is to be a US operating crypto organization.
In a nutshell, impossible to comply.
Yes. Yeah, and I think we have evidence for this, because there are basically no securities compliant cryptos in existence. The SEC claims that there are, I think, 8. But on the other hand, the SEC was asked to disclose the list of these interesting organizations that are applying to be securities registered cryptos, and they wouldn't. So I don't know how to interpret this.
Thank you. We need to close. I have some 2 final questions. You know, right now there are talks about forming a new coalition going on. So maybe it's proper time to ask this question. What is your actual wish list for the negotiators or for the policymakers regarding DAOs?
So as Reimo said, I would agree on that. There is no need to start regulating, since there is a small risk compared to the overall society.
No new regulation, okay?
Not yet. Not yet. We don't know what's going to be needed, but in the sense that carefully watch over it, of course, and we don't need to educate them, but I think it's good to inform if we are trying something innovative to keep up with the policymakers, in the sense that inform them. Just leverage the possibility that Estonian is offering of communicating directly with the policymakers. Well, at least try. It's not that if you're going to write an email, you're always going to get an answer, or if you call, you're going to directly talk with the person in charge. But at least try to have this active communication, because it seems that, at least for some people, they are willing to listen. And I think it's good to try to keep innovating and just updating the people that might regulate you in the future. So I would say that.
Real quick, as we are out of time. I would take this kind of a more broader principle of the DAO and suggest this for the new coalition, is that it's kind of an engagement that engage everybody, and that nobody would feel that they are left behind. But it's, as far as the DAO regulation is concerned, I truly believe they have much bigger problems there.
Thank you. I think we need to close. So thank you very much. It seems Estonia is ready for DAOs. No need for new regulation, but we need to carefully observe the market. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening us. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, panel.